In May 2019, I got sick. I mean, like hit by a truck, flu kind of sick, where you just like, all you can do is just lie in bed, barely. Well, I heard my front door bell ring, and I somehow got to the front door, and it was actually Molly, my good friend Molly, dropping off a pot of chicken noodle soup at my doorstep. And she was headed back up the driveway, and I waved, and she waved. And I bent over to pick up that soup and just kept going right on my face. I mean, just splat on my face. She came running down the driveway and took a look at this bloody gash on my eyebrow, and she said, "We should get you to the ER because you might need a stitch on that. We don't want you to have a scar, girl." So she poured me into her car, and we headed down to ER. And the doctors were like, "Oh, yeah, we don't care about the eyebrow. Your oxygen is so low and your sodium is so low. We're going to admit you to the hospital." Oh, okay. So I'm a patient in a hospital and had dinner that night. Little hospital dinner really was not bad. The next day, a handful of my favorite students came to visit me, and my principal came to visit me, and I had IVs in and was resting comfortably. And that was the last I remember for days. This next chunk of history was related to my son, who was my warrior, who was my eyes, part of my eyes and ears while I was in the hospital. Well, my oxygen was so low that the doctors said, "We have to intubate you. We have to intubate you and put you on a ventilator to bring your O2 saturation up." And the way they intubate you is, first of all, they put you out and they tip your head back and they slide like a speculum kind of thing. And they put a balloon type of thing to force oxygen into your lungs and to make it so you can't pull that thing out. So, and then what they do from there is they put you on a ventilator. And then they knock you out into a medically induced coma. Yeah, in ICU. And by the way, do you know how they put you into a medically induced coma? They put you on a fentanyl drip. Fentanyl, I mean, when I think of fentanyl, I think of those parents that are like, ugh, in the front seat of their minivan with the kids in their car seat, and the parents are just out of it. But that's medically what they use it for, is to put you out. And the idea was to put me into ICU on a ventilator in a coma to rest. And when they mean rest, they mean like they don't want you to move a muscle. They want whatever oxygen you're taking in to just go to living, no moving. And if you flinch or move in any way, they just knock that fentanyl up. So the plan was for me to be there on ICU for a couple of days, really rest, bring my oxygen up, get off the ventilator, get better, and go home. That is not what happened. I was so sick that I went down, and I kept going down and down and down. And they were doing blood tests for toxicology and autoimmune and bacteria and virus for obscure diseases like Goodpasture disease, and getting x-rays every day. And of course, I have no idea what's going on, because it's not like there's a bright light or you're hovering over your hospital bed. You're dead. I mean, you're out. So the x-rays showed just this bare sliver of lung left, and they gathered up my son and his girlfriend and my supportive parents from Oregon, and even my ex-husband and his wife were kind of part of the team, and said, "Yeah, be prepared for her to die. We don't think she's going to make it." What? Whoa. And of course, I don't know any of this that's going on. So all they could do was to wait and treat me symptomatically. And day after day after, and I did not come back up. Nothing was helping. They were doing all those tests, and they could not find out what was wrong with me. They couldn't figure out how to treat me. Nothing they did. Even to this day, nothing they tested for showed a thing. This is May 2019. That's about 6 months before COVID. Could I have been an early COVID case that they couldn't diagnose because there was no test for it? I don't know. I'll never know. I'll never know what made me so sick. So my oxygen actually started to come around, and one night I'm in ICU, which is just like a it's a big ward, really, with just curtains between all the patients. And it was quiet. It was night as far as I could tell. And I just opened my eyes and looked around. And I had a ventilator tube. I had a feeding tube, so you can't speak at all. I had IVs in both arms. I had tubes everywhere. And my arms were tied down. And as a former physical therapist, I knew that this was bad, but I didn't know why. I had no idea why I was there. I didn't remember anything. I just knew that this was really bad. Well, the nurses came in, saw that I was alert, and told my family, "Yay, mommy's alive. Yay, my daughter's alive." But they kept me on the ventilator because my oxygen was not high enough to take me off. And I tell you, it was so painful. Kind of like, you know how childbirth, women out there have had the babies, you know that it hurts so much, but there's like this very convenient amnesia that prevents you from remembering just how much it hurt. It was kind of like that. It just hurt so much. And you're just like, you're breathing with it. The ventilator's breathing for you, and you're in 2 beats and out 2 beats, and just every breath was this glacial age of pain. I also could not communicate. My arms were so weak. I couldn't even hold a pencil to write. I couldn't drag my finger across an iPad and scribble out anything. So they would hold up a little communication board that had A, B, C, D, E, F, G on it, and they'd drag, my daughter, my life force from Louisiana, would drag her finger across the board, and I'd squeeze my hand when she'd come to R, and in my head I'm thinking, oh, I mean S, and have to start over again, and it was that whole time was so laborious. At one point, I was actually able to start writing letters in people's hands to communicate. Well, as a former physical therapist, I had seen patients on ventilators, and it was awful. I'd have patients that I would see bedbound for weeks, for months, sometimes even a year, and just never get better. And all of them that I knew eventually died. And I just thought, this is terrible. Oh my God, this is awful. Just the pain, being alert, being aware, being totally constricted and bedbound. And I'd gotten to the point where I could write pretty well in people's hands to communicate what I wanted to say. So I indicated to the night nurse that I wanted to talk to her. So she said, well, honey, let me go put down, tidy up a few other patients. It'll be about an hour, and I'll come back and I will sit with you and we will talk about what you want to talk about. So she came back, and I'm writing in her hand, and I write S U I, and she's like, Suey. See, what do you mean, Suey? And right then, Casey, the night respiratory therapist, came into the room. He's just standing there watching everything. And she says to him, what does she mean, Suey? And I'm looking at him, and he's looking at her, and she's looking at him. And he says, well, there's only one word I know that begins with S-U-I, and that's suicide. And I blink my eyes like, yes, that's what I'm talking about. I wanted to investigate the paperwork that it took to explore assisted suicide. It was that horrible. I didn't want to be wheeled into a nursing home for what? Weeks? Months? Years? Stuck on a ventilator in some sort of semi-awake-ish, semi-alive state. Well, she doesn't mean suicide. And I'm blinking like, yes. And she left. And Casey came and sat next to me, and he said, I just want you to just relax for a minute. And I want you to just have some patience. He said, I'm going to be back on floor, back on shift in 5 days. And in those 5 days, you'll be shocked at how well you are going to get. So just wait. He was amazing. So I waited. And in those 5 days, my oxygen came up enough that I was able to get off the ventilator. And here's what they do when they extubate you. I didn't know what would happen. They just gather some people around the bed, and they just bloop, pull out this like dead eel out from your diaphragm. It just feels like it just came out from the bottom of my diaphragm, this big slimy thing. Oh, God, it was awful. But I could breathe on my own. Yes. But the thing is, I couldn't speak yet because my vocal cords had been pretty battered and they were kind of atrophied from disuse, so I could just barely use it. So I was still writing in people's hands. Well, from there, I just got better. The next day, I could sit up on the side of the bed with the help of a physical therapist. And the next day, I could stand. The next day, I could walk, walking with a walker, just slowly, but every day making progress. And there was a little talk about me going to a rehab hospital. And I used to work in a rehab hospital, and they're great, but it's a decreased level of care, and I didn't want any lower level of care. I wanted to stay right where I was. So they actually moved me into a kind of a posh ICU where you really had your own room, and at night you could see the lights from the helicopter pad, and sometimes the helicopter would come down and leave. And I had really been made aware of really how close it got. So those 5 days later, Casey came to visit me and he said, "See, look at you." And we just like laughed and cried for half an hour. It was just amazing. I couldn't move around in bed by myself. I certainly couldn't get out of bed and walk by myself. But I was making such progress that the doctor said, "You are a medical masterpiece. You're not going anywhere. We're not sending you to rehab. You're going to stay right here because there's a trend happening. We don't want to mess that up." So my family, by the way, if you are ever in a hospital, you have got to have family physically at your side. I know in the days of COVID and the pandemic, those things aren't possible. But in the future, because it's not an aside against hospitals. It's just you need as many team members as you can get watching out to making sure you're getting the right level of care and you're all headed in the same direction. So I got to go home. Well, actually, I went to my son's house. My son and his girlfriend took fantastic care of me for about a day or so. And then my good friend Lisa, who's also a physical therapist and my former boss, came to my house and watched over me for about 3 days. I was on a walker still. And then she left. And I was on my own. And my good friend Gina said, "So, Elizabeth, do you feel like you have a new lease on life?" I'm like, "I feel like I should, but not really. I just want my life back. I just want to be doing what I was doing." But the one thing that I did do, and the reason I'm talking to you, is that I went to YouTube looking for people who had been through what I had been on a ventilator, had gotten this horrible flu. What was it? We don't know what it was, even still. And just talking about their experiences. I also was really curious to find boomers. Just talking about being a boomer, youth culture, pop culture, anything, life and death, and anything in between. There's nobody. There is not a single boomer out there talking regularly about what it's like to get old, older, aged, elderly. I mean, what it was like to be 40 years old, what it's like to be 61 years old, what it might be like to be 80 years old, and talking about, well, I'm a teacher. I'm a 6th through 12th grade teacher, and I would tell you that they are great. The up-and-coming generation is amazing. We're going to be fine. But talking about things that happens, in youth culture, there's nobody out there. I'm still looking. If you find anybody, let me know. So what I want to do is just report regularly to YouTube to document me getting older. Do you remember those time lapses that were really popular where people would like take pictures of themselves every day for like 4 years and you just see that whole time lapse? I love those things. So for those that care, those that are interested, I'm going to be here talking regularly about life. I don't mean curmudgeon-y, it was so much better in the olden days, because it wasn't. The 70s were the most boring decade ever. I'm not talking about fashion and makeup. I mean, just life, things that happen to you, things that happen to me. So I welcome you to join me on my little journey. I will be here, and then someday I won't. And I'll tell you what it's like between now and then. Oh, shoot. YouTube comments. Oh, I'm going to get killed. Today is day 22,320. I hope to see you again. Bye.